The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Chuck Palahniuk, the novelist and author best known for writing Fight Club and Choke. Over the past 27 years, you published 24 best-selling fiction novels, 3 of which were made into movies, 15 short stories, and a personal memoir, making you one of the most prolific authors of our time. Your first novel, Fight Club, published in 1996, was adapted into the Hollywood blockbuster movie starring Brad Pitt and Edward Norton, with the New York Times describing it as the defining cult movie of our time. Your work has been called nihilistic, transgressive, provocative, radical, adventurous, and graphic, and you continue to push the boundaries of storytelling. Your latest book, Not Forever, But For Now, is a horror satire that explores the life of 2 brothers living in a privileged life in the Welsh countryside as they contemplate joining the family business. Chuck, welcome back to London Real.
Brian, boy, you just said my entire life. Give my eulogy someday, okay? I want you to give my eulogy.
I'm in. Can we write that like in the will? And I'll just be there. I'll wear a suit and everything.
It's yours.
Stranger than fiction. Chuck, it's great to have you. You were here about 2.5 years ago during lockdown, and we did our video interview, and it was something I remember for a long time. I grew up with Fight Club on repeat on my DVD in New York City as I slowly tried to kill myself. I think we talked about that last time. So you have a special place in my heart. Really enjoying this new book, and the fact that it's in Wales, which is, if people don't know, a country next to England in the United Kingdom, makes it all the more special, especially when there's events happening right here in London in the book. So I can't wait to ask you about it. I got so many questions as far as that, because not a lot of people know about Wales or Welsh culture. So I want to hear about why you chose that. But before we get started, I wanted to get your take on the world a bit, Chuck. I mean, just today, we had a former president publish his mugshot on Twitter, and to the celebration of much of the world. Meanwhile, there's a sitting president who necessarily can't tell you his name, and it all sounds like either a good or bad Chuck Palahniuk book. I'm curious, do you ever look at the world and think it's a bit stranger than fiction? Does it ever turn out the way you think it is? Do you get inspired by world events? And how do you compare them to something that maybe you might write?
I'm not at all troubled by it. I think it's always been this way, and we're just more aware of it right now. When I pull up what I think is a hard news story, and they're quoting unidentified people or palace insiders, it's like the whole world is turned into a tabloid, and there is no hard news. And so, yeah, the crazy has always been there, and we're just more aware of the crazy because we have access to it now. And also, I think that another thing is newspapers have gone crazy. Media has gone crazy because they found themselves bankrupted by things like Craigslist. And so they are going to kind of keep whipping the news cycle. Everything is going to become the New York Post. Everything is going to become the National Enquirer because they are so desperate to keep our eyeballs, because we're not buying their classified ads anymore. So this is just it's sort of a toboggan ride to lunacy just to keep us watching. And if I accept that, I'm perfectly happy.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it's a pretty good breakdown. It's funny you mentioned the National Enquirer, and maybe we're dating ourselves, but I remember as a kid at the grocery store, there was kind of like the National Enquirer near the checkout line, and it always had to. It seemed like every week there was like UFOs who had impregnated the latest Hollywood star. It felt like that was a regular article, but it was the most lambastic, crazy headlines ever. And now you're right. Maybe those seem to be showing up now everywhere, those things.
And it was always attributed to a source, a scientific source in Russia or China, someplace that could never be verified. And now you open up Time magazine and the whole headline is attributed to some person with an avatar on social media who said this thing, and we have no idea who they are or if they even exist. So again, the whole world has become that unattributed, that unverifiable source somewhere who said something.
Right. And whereas, I mean, a lot of your work, you explore pockets of weirdness, especially some of your fiction stuff, where you actually go and find these pockets of weirdness. And you were just saying those have always existed, but now everyone can see them on Twitter immediately, globally. And so now it feels like there's more weirdness, but you're saying there not necessarily is. It's just now we have all access to that.
Right. One thing that I love right now is that the talk about cults are coming back. And so right now it's kind of a reverse Andy Warhol. Instead of everyone getting 15 minutes of fame, everyone will get 15 minutes of privacy. And so I can't wait to see these little sort of hole in the wall cults that we have no idea are proliferating like crazy.
And how are we going to find out they're there?
When they kill people.
So Netflix has a new documentary on Waco, Texas, and I watched it last week because I was traveling. And I mean, some people don't remember Waco. I know you do, and I do. But it was just wild, Chuck, to watch that with the news footage, and you think you know the story, and then you hear it again, and I was just like, wow. I was very impressed with their gun skills, being able to shoot that many ATF agents and hold off 51 days during that siege. But it was interesting. And then they had a bunch of the cult members and how earnestly they spoke. And of course, we've seen the documentary Wild, Wild, Wild Country, which has happened up near you in Oregon. And one thing I noticed, Chuck, is that these people, man, they loved being in the cult. It's like the most connected they've ever felt, and they would probably never had that experience anywhere else in the world, not in the nuclear family, not in the Democratic Party, nowhere else. And a lot of your work touches on that need for connection, right?
Well, especially after you leave your family, and most people have a good family experience, but you're in structured education for so much of your life. And then when you pop out the end of that education with whatever degree, you pop out and suddenly you have nobody, you have no structure. And that is a perfect time to pop into a cult. And for me, it was Landmark Education, which I am not calling a cult for reasons of not wanting to be sued. But I loved Landmark. I loved that sort of second, third generation of Est. I loved going to my seminars. So much of Fight Club is based on, homework that we got from seminars, these Gestalt and existentialist sort of things in the world. And then beyond Landmark, I went straight into the Cacophony Society, where we were pranking cities and altering billboards and just pulling all of these enormous stunts as a group. And again, it's that kind of extended family and after school. So it's a way to sort of tread water and to have adventures before you have a family of your own.
Wow. So you mentioned Landmark. They have a big building right here in Camden in London. You're probably familiar with it. And it's a wild looking building. I don't know if it's theirs, but it's got like gargoyles outside and all sorts of stuff. But I know some people that have gone through it, and I didn't know you had. That's wild.
It's one of the reasons why Fight Club got made was a lot of people at Fox had gone through it. And there were parts of Fight Club that really sort of resonated with these Fox people. They said, wow, this is so Landmark. And at the time, we were all still sort of reeling from our sort of Landmark high.
And so Do you think they greenlit the movie subconsciously somehow because they were feel?
There were a lot of people just completely threw in, and a lot of people lost their jobs. And you really have to have that kind of passion if you're going to put your job on the line.
They lost their job after the movie was made.
And after the movie more or less tanked, David Fincher, the director, he tells this great story about how when they had the final cut, the head of publicity came to Fincher and said, congratulations. Thank you, David. You have made a movie that has got so much male nudity in it that no man is ever going to want to see it, and so much blood in it that no woman is ever going to want to see it. You have made a movie that is impossible to promote. You have made my job a living hell. Thank you. And it was downhill from there.
I think I still remember Ed Norton coming out saying something like, he was comparing it to movies in the past that were misunderstood at the time and became classics. I think I'm thinking of Raging Bull. I think you mentioned that specifically, and a few others. But I was looking at the numbers preparing for now, and it didn't do terrible, but it didn't do great, right? Half the budget maybe on the opening.
It came in second to The Story of Us opening weekend, which was a Michelle Pfeiffer movie that is completely forgotten. And the movie that ate up theaters that summer was A Double Indemnity. That was the #1 movie all summer. Double Jeopardy.
Oh yeah, okay. Okay, but I've watched Fight Club 100 or 200 times. And so when I was 30 years old in New York City, and I had left, so I had a cult, which was my fraternity house during college. Talk about a cult. I mean, and that was amazing. But I mean, a proper cult with the code words and the hazing rituals, and it was an amazing thing. And then I get out and I'm in New York City and I got nothing. And what do? I end up going to drugs, probably natural. And then I'm there, I'm 30 years old, 2001, and Fight Club's on repeat in the background. And I was reading your analysis that there's not many movies for men at that time. I think you said Dead Poets Society and Fight Club were like the only movies made for men looking, I don't know, for answers when it comes to their own existential angst. But for me, it was therapy because those were the only guys I could see anywhere, this is pre-internet, that seemed to be experiencing anything that I was feeling.
Well, the larger context is that Dead Poets and Fight Club were the only movies in which they presented a context for men to talk about their experience. And at the time, there were a million stories about women coming together in a task, typically, to discuss their experience. And those were Joy Luck Club, where they played mahjong, movies like How to Make an American Quilt, where they got together and they made a quilt, Divine Secrets of the Ya-Ya Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. It was a whole slew of movies in which there was a context for women to just talk about what their lives were. Different generations of women as well. And there just wasn't that for men.
Yeah, well, it really filled the need. It's interesting. We're being pulled into Fight Club because I heard recently that last year there was kind of a big uproar because China had rewritten the ending of Fight Club, and I thought this fascinating. What were your thoughts on that, and what actually happened? And also, a lot of people don't realize you wrote the book. I've read the book many times, and it's very different than the movie, right?
It is, and the book has a much more redemptive ending. And when the Chinese government put that big single card on the end of the movie that said Tyler had been arrested and Tyler had been sent to an insane asylum, that was kind of closer to the book than the movie was. But the part that sort of irked me was when Ted Cruz tried to make hay out of it, and he condemned China for censorship, when in fact, I don't think there is a school or a prison in America where Fight Club as a book is allowed. It is censored probably more than any other book or movie in the United States. So, yeah, I think we need to sort of clean our own room.
Is it really censored that much, that book?
if you look at the lists of books that are censored in American prisons state by state, almost all of my books show up on almost all the lists. So yeah, Fight Club is pretty much on every list, and almost all of my books are on pretty much every list.
Why is that, Chuck?
You know, they say it promotes gang activity. They say some of the books are too sexually arousing. There's just kind of a whole spectrum of things that they disallow.
And when you see someone like Ted Cruz pointing the finger at China, this is probably happens a lot, is that when you actually dig deeper, you realize that, yeah, they're censoring on their own as well. They're just using this as an example to point the finger at someone else. Very human behavior.
Yeah.
And China, first of all, are you surprised that they're playing the movie in China, first of all? And second of all, why would they rewrite the ending?
I'm not surprised they're playing the movie in China. China loves Brad Pitt. China, you know, China.
Don't you love Brad Pitt?
Everyone loves Brad Pitt, but in China, he is a god. He is
Really?
He is bigger than Steven Seagal. And also, you know, again, it goes back to there's just so few movies that really talk about the male experience, and this goes on for, you know, the last 20 years. No, I can't think of a movie that's kind of followed up and done the same thing. 9/11 kind of made transgressive movies forbidden, so maybe that's been a big part of it.
Did you really notice that post 9/11 these things weren't getting made, had no chance of getting made?
Especially in books, because before 9/11, if you sold a book to a publisher, the publisher sent you a separate contract that said, if somebody does some cockamamie thing that's in the book and they get hurt, then the publisher will protect you and take care of all of your legal hassles. But after 9/11, they quit sending out those contracts. So after 9/11, if you put something kind of edgy into a book, you were on your own. And so it made a lot of writers self-censor. They just were not going to put things like that in books for fear of being sued. And writers don't have the deep pockets that publishers have.
Wow. All right. That's good. I didn't realize that. And just real quickly back to Fight Club. I mean, again, the male experience. And so I haven't watched that movie in probably a couple of years, but I could quote it, of course, which is quoting your writing. But, you know, it really was talking about how, you know, we're a generation of men raised by women. I'm wondering if another one is really the thing we need. I actually thought about that quote about a week ago. Thank you, Chuck. And again, it was deep, right? It was going really deep into the young male psyche and trying to examine all the frustrations we had and like what we were thinking and how we could do what we could do about them. And then you were watching these two guys that ended up being one guy trying to process that whole thing. And there hasn't really been a movie like that since. And what did it give the world? Like, it became a cult classic probably because of that reason, Chuck?
Yeah, because it just kind of stood there alone for so long. Nothing else was doing it in that kind of didactic way. It wasn't just about a through line plot. It wasn't just about a romance. It kind of had a soapbox as well. It had a lot of truisms built into it. And in retrospect, now that I see Jordan Peterson talk about things, a big part of me thinks that the rough play that Jordan Peterson talks about, that kind of play in which children learn their boundaries, that they are allowed to inflict and to be sort of inflicted upon, and they learn how much is too much. I think that for kids who did not get that rough play from their fathers, whether they're male or female, Fight Club became the symbol for that rough play. Fight Club became that sort of delayed developmental stage where you were told how much hitting is too much hitting, where you were able to sort of recognize how much pain you could endure and still, you know, consider it play. So I think that rough play that Jordan Peterson talks about was just a really good way of framing what I was trying to depict in Fight Club.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.